Hello. In this video, we're going to learn about how to animate using jQuery. Now, jQuery is not the most efficient, fast, quickly updating way to do animations, but for simple animations that are not too involved, that don't have too many moving parts, it's a great way to get started with animating elements on your web page. So we're going to start with a simple page as usual. The square is a div, and then we have 3 paragraphs. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to write jQuery so that when you click this paragraph, the div will move toward the right. And when you click this paragraph, the div will move toward the left. So let's look at our code. So our index, okay, normal head, right? All the normal head things. We've got an H1. We've got a completely empty div, that is the square. And we have the 3 paragraphs. And the 2 that are going to be clickable have a different class on each one. So move right is on the class that, the paragraph that will do that when you click. And move left is the class on the other paragraph. And don't forget, we have our jQuery files at the bottom, the first one being the library jQuery, and the second one being the file that we're going to write ourselves. The CSS, very normal stuff, and the div, which is the square. It has a width of 200, a height of 200, and it has a background color of orange. Nothing else in here. Now, the first thing that we're going to do before we write jQuery is I need to talk a bit about position. We use CSS properties that are related to position, and in order to have them work, you need to have a position property on the element that's going to be moved or to be positioned. And there are several, but we'll start with relative, all right? And what we'll do right off the bat is we'll say move the top of the square, this div, move it minus 100 pixels from where it should be, from its normal or regular position within the document. So no jQuery, just CSS, and I save and I reload, and you see that with just those 2 lines of CSS, the square has been taken out of its normal position in the DOM and moved 100 pixels up. So by saying minus 100 pixels, minus 100, we moved it up from where it was. So the top is 0. So when you have a negative number, you're getting closer to 0. If you have a positive number, you would be moving it down. And that's what we'll do next. We'll say plus 100 pixels. And again, this is just the CSS alone. And so we go over here and we reload. And the square has moved down, as you might have expected. Notice that the area of the page where the square would have been normally is maintained and left empty. So this is a function of position relative. When you use position relative, a blank space is left where the element would have been. Now, we haven't done any animation yet, but before we can start, you need to understand about position in CSS. And so there are 5 different values possible for the position property. And we've already looked at relative. Relative is the value we've just demonstrated. It moves the element out of the normal flow, and it leaves a gap where the element should have been. We saw that. Now, static is the normal default position. This is with no position element at all. Everything on the page will have static as its position value. So normally we don't put that in the CSS because it's the default. It's already there. So now let's have a look at how absolute position works. So in our CSS, we're going to change the value of the position property for the div, which is the square, to absolute. And we're going to change the top position to 0. Okay, so this is going to move the top of the div to the very top of the browser window. That's the 0 position. Top within the window is 0, and top of the square will go to that position within the window. So we save and we reload, and so that might be what you expected to happen. Now, you also saw the text kind of jump when I reloaded. If I reload again, it won't jump. But this indicates that the gap that we saw with relative position is gone with absolute position. So when we use absolute, no gap is left where the element would have been in the normal flow. So you know that this square originally was in between the head and the paragraph. If I take this off temporarily and go back, this is how this page is laid out in the normal flow. This is how it looks in the HTML. The H1, and then the square, and then the 3 paragraphs. But when we've got absolute position, it's as if the square wasn't even in the normal flow at all. And we said top 0, so the top of the square is at the 0 position within the browser window. Now let's add one additional coordinate for positioning, and that would be left. And let's also make that 0. So I save and I reload, and so the leftmost edge of the browser window is 0, and the rightmost edge is some high number. The top is 0, and the bottom is some high number, right? So for your coordinates, usually we use a pair top and left, top and right, bottom and left, or bottom and right. We don't use more than 2 because it wouldn't really work, right? But we're basically pinning the square to a particular position on the page. And to show you how left will work, let's actually make that 500 pixels now. Save and reload. All right, so it has moved 500 pixels away from the left edge of the browser. It's the left edge of the square that's at a position of 500 pixels. So the distance from the left edge of the parent element, which in this case is the body, to the left edge of the square is exactly 500 pixels right now. So what if we did it from the right side? Okay, so I'll keep it at 500 pixels, and I will just change left to right and save and reload. And we get a little bit of a movement because apparently my screen is probably about 1200 pixels wide. If you want to anchor the element to the right side, perhaps have it very close to the right side, it's good to use the right coordinate instead of the left coordinate. So think about what you want to position it in relation to, and then choose top or bottom, and choose left or right. Let's show you putting it, say I wanted to have it really close to the right side. So say I want it really, really near. Maybe I make this 2 rem instead of 500 pixels, right? So perhaps for a menu or something, you always want it to be near the right side, and it's going to keep that relationship to the right side no matter how wide the browser window is. See? So that's a good reason to use right instead of left. Okay, so I'm going to put it back on the left side because I want to add a bunch of text to the page and show you what happens to an absolutely positioned element when we scroll. So I will go into the HTML and I will add 5 big fat paragraphs that I'll paste in here and save and reload. And so now I've got enough text in here that I can scroll. And when I do, you see what happens to the element. It starts to scroll off the top. And if this page were narrower, like say I open up my developer tools, I make it narrower, right? And it just scrolls off. So absolute position really sticks the thing within the body of the document, right? So it stays in that place and it scrolls with the rest of the content. If you did not want that to happen, that's when we use the property for position fixed. Okay, so if we put in fixed instead of absolute, okay, fixed and save and reload, right now it looks like nothing happened, no difference. But when I begin to scroll, you see that fixed is actually very, very different from absolute. So fixed position sticks it relative to the browser window, and absolute, which we had before, sticks it relative to the document itself, which can scroll up and down. So we've now covered all the position values except for one. And the last remaining one is sticky. And you can see that it doesn't have the greatest browser support yet, but it will soon. So how does it work? Apply it. So it's position sticky. And we usually don't use a left or right with sticky. We only use top or bottom. And I'm going to put 1 rem as my top value. And I will save and I will reload. Well, it goes back to it looks like the normal flow. It looks like the div is where it's supposed to be normally, after the H1 and before all the paragraphs. And when I start to scroll, it looks like, yeah, fine. But this is what sticky does. So sticky could be pretty cool for certain kinds of menus. And so you can make something sticky at the top of your page or at the bottom of your page. But we would never use sticky for animation. So let's finally get on to the animation part, jQuery animate part of this video. So we will go back to the CSS and we'll take off all indication of left, right, top, bottom, and we'll use position relative. And now it's important to understand that that is the only thing that I need to do in the CSS file for this animate that I'm going to use in jQuery. Okay, everything else in the CSS is totally normal and mundane, but position relative on the thing I'm going to move is absolutely necessary. If you do not have position relative on the thing you want to animate, it will not animate. So we're going to use top, left, bottom, and right, but in the jQuery now. So we are set up for some jQuery action. Now I've got just a blank jQuery template here. I have my document ready set up, and so we're going to do stuff in the middle. And oh, by the way, yeah, let's get rid of all that extra text that I put in before. Because we won't need all of that. We will just have our 3 little paragraphs. So back to this and close my console. So finally ready to animate. Okay, so if you recall, I'm going to make the animation happen when I click this paragraph or when I click this paragraph. So in my jQuery file, I am going to paste. So I've got 2 event listeners. The one listens to a class that is move right, and that is what's on the top paragraph that says click me to move it right. And then my second event listener, another click listener, it is going to listen for a click on the class move left, and that class is on my second paragraph, right? So clicking will happen on the paragraphs, And what am I going to put inside here to make this happen? Okay, so the jQuery animate command, it's going to act on a particular object. And so I only have the one div on the page. So I'm going to have it act on the div, which is the square. And then the command is this, animate. Okay, so it starts like this. But inside the animate parentheses, we have to have a pair of curly braces to give the instructions about where the animation is going to go. And so I'm going to write my instructions on a new line, but keep in mind that it's a pair of curly braces inside the parentheses that come as part of the animate method, okay? All right, so I'm going to move it toward the right, but what I want to do is I want to push it from the left side. So you think you're pushing from the left, so what you want is left, and this is the same style or syntax as when you use the CSS method, the jQuery CSS method, and you're putting more than one property into it. You have to use the jQuery set of property names, left is fine, then a colon, but the value must be inside quotes, okay, as we see here. If we were going to add another one like top or bottom, we'd need a comma, right, for the next, so that we could have a second property value pair. But we're not going to, we'll take that comma off. And the other thing to understand is, why am I incrementing? Why am I using the JavaScript plus equal to add this 200 pixels? Well, because every time I click, I want it to move a further 200 pixels. So it's additive. I'm going to add from the left, pushing it 200 pixels every time I click. So there's only one more thing to add in this listener, this one for moving right, okay? And that is inside the animate method, inside its parentheses, after the curly brace, comma, we want to add slow. So you put in the speed, and there are some other options that you could put in there, but the punctuation is very, very particular. So notice where the curly braces end. They have to be followed by a comma, and then we can put in a speed, and this is going to make the animation happen. So I'm saving, and I'm reloading, and now it's the paragraph, remember, that has this class on it. So every time I click it, this div is going to move to the right. And I can, in fact, keep clicking it until it disappears off the side of the page. I mean, with no constraints in the code, I could keep clicking it until I couldn't even get it back, okay? So it looks pretty smooth because of the slow option. But let's do the other one so we can bring it back. So we can actually grab this same hunk of code to make life easier, copy it, paste it down in here, but we don't now want to plus 200 pixels away from the left. What we actually want to do is we want to minus. So what we've got here, the only change between this and this is that we make the left edge closer to the left edge of the window. So every time we want to go left, we're decreasing the number. We're going closer to 0. 0 is the very leftmost edge of the window or the parent element, okay? So we save, we reload, it repositions, so we know this works, but now we find clicking the other thing also works, and we could move it off the side, we can bring it back. It's a pretty nice little thing. So there are a lot of options. You can move stuff up and down. You can move stuff left and right. If you're doing them simultaneously, what you'd have is something diagonal, right? If you're moving top and left at the same time, it would look diagonal. Now you probably want to see what that would look like. Okay, let's say top, the same thing. Okay, save, reload. So now what we've got is a diagonal movement, okay? And this one still goes left. So it took us a long time to get here because I wanted you to understand what the top and the left are. And I wanted you to understand why we've got this relative, and I didn't want you to forget that you have to have that position property on the thing that's moving, okay? The jQuery itself is pretty simple, but now you understand that you can make a lot of movement happen. You can add an awful lot of code to this to detect the position of the cursor, to detect the position of the object that you're moving, and even to figure out what is the width and height of the window that you're moving in. So you could put some limits on how far it could move. So I'm going to put this back for a second, save, reload. So we did all that work to get to just this, and yet it works really, really well. And if you understand what you're doing, you can make some pretty interesting animations with jQuery.